Little Red Riding Hood. Once upon a time, in a quaint village near a vast forest, there lived a sweet little girl who was loved by everyone who knew her. She was particularly cherished by her grandmother, who had made her a beautiful red hooded cloak. The girl loved the cloak so much that she wore it everywhere, earning her the nickname Little Red Riding Hood. One day, Little Red Riding Hood's mother called her over and said, "Your grandmother is ill, my dear. I have prepared a basket of food and treats for you to take to her. It will cheer her up. Remember to stay on the path, and don't talk to strangers." "Yes, mother," Little Red Riding Hood replied, and with that, she set off through the forest, the basket swinging in her hand. The path to her grandmother's house wound through tall trees and thick underbrush, but Little Red Riding Hood felt no fear. She loved the forest and the animals that lived there. As she walked, she encountered a wolf. The wolf, sly and cunning, was immediately interested in the little girl and her basket of goodies. "Good morning, Little Red Riding Hood," he said in a friendly tone. "Where are you going so early?" Little Red Riding Hood, remembering her mother's warning, hesitated, but then decided it was safe to tell the wolf. "I'm going to visit my grandmother. She's not feeling well, and I'm bringing her some food to make her feel better." The wolf's eyes gleamed with malice, though he kept his voice pleasant. "What a kind and thoughtful girl you are. Where does your grandmother live?" "She lives in a cottage at the end of this path," Little Red Riding Hood answered innocently. "It's the one with the red door and white shutters." "How lovely," said the wolf. "I wish your grandmother a speedy recovery. Have a wonderful day, Little Red Riding Hood." And with that, he trotted off into the forest, his mind already plotting. The wolf, knowing a shortcut, quickly made his way to the grandmother's cottage. He knocked on the door, and when the frail voice of Little Red Riding Hood's grandmother asked who it was, he replied, "It's me, Little Red Riding Hood. I've brought you some food to help you feel better. Come in, dear." The grandmother called from her bed. The wolf entered the cottage, pounced on the grandmother, and locked her in the wardrobe. He then put on her nightgown and cap, climbed into her bed, and pulled the covers up to his chin, waiting for Little Red Riding Hood to arrive. Not long after, Little Red Riding Hood reached the cottage. She knocked on the door and heard the wolf's gruff voice, disguised to sound like her grandmother's, say, "Come in, my dear." Little Red Riding Hood entered and approached the bed. "Grandmother, I brought you some food," she said, setting the basket on the table. She then looked at her grandmother and noticed something was off. "Grandmother, what big ears you have!" she exclaimed. "All the better to hear you with, my dear," the wolf replied. "Grandmother, what big eyes you have!" she said, stepping closer. "All the better to see you with, my dear," the wolf said. "Grandmother, what big hands you have!" Little Red Riding Hood continued, feeling uneasy. "All the better to hug you with, my dear," the wolf said, his voice growing more sinister. "Grandmother, what big teeth you have!" she exclaimed in horror. "All the better to eat you with," the wolf roared, throwing off the covers and leaping at Little Red Riding Hood. Just as the wolf was about to pounce, the door burst open, and a woodcutter, who had been passing by and heard the commotion, rushed in. With a mighty swing of his axe, he struck the wolf down, saving Little Red Riding Hood just in time. The woodcutter helped Little Red Riding Hood free her grandmother from the wardrobe. Though shaken, the grandmother was unharmed. They all sat together, relieved that the danger had passed. Little Red Riding Hood thanked the woodcutter profusely for his bravery. "Thank you for saving us," she said. "I will never forget your kindness." The woodcutter smiled warmly. "I'm just glad I could help. Always remember, Little Red Riding Hood, to be cautious and heed your mother's warnings." From that day forward, Little Red Riding Hood promised to always stay on the path and never talk to strangers. The bond between her and her grandmother grew even stronger, and they often recalled the day when a brave woodcutter saved them from the wicked wolf. And so, Little Red Riding Hood continued to visit her grandmother, always carrying her basket of goodies, and they lived happily ever after, with the lessons learned from their frightening encounter never far from their minds.